My dear brothers and sisters, today the Holy Catholic Church is celebrating the feast of Saint Anthony of Padua. So that is why the Church has given us this reading about Jesus sending his disciples to preach. And Saint Anthony of Padua was one of the most famous preachers in the history of the Church. And Saint Anthony is very popular among the common people, not only now, even at the time of his life, even when he was alive. He was born in 1195 AD and then died when he was just around 35 years of age. Only 35 years he lived. He died in 1231. There is a history behind it. He is the fastest canonized saint, one of the fastest canonized saint, because he died in 1231. Within 1 year, he was beatified and canonized. Because he was already a saint during his lifetime. And everybody knew he's a living saint and he lived an austere life. Though he died in Padua, near to Padua in Italy, he is originally from Portugal. He's a Portuguese Franciscan missionary. And when he was very small, his original name, his baptism name is Fernando. And then he was attracted to the spiritual life, austere life, religious life, and then he joined the Augustinian congregation. He was not a Franciscan. He didn't join Franciscans initially, but he was an Augustinian monk, and he became a priest in the Augustinian congregation. He's originally an Augustinian monk. And then when he was leading a peaceful life, prayer life, holy life, in his village where he was, the Augustinian congregations, the monastery where he was staying, there were so many other monasteries, and a newly started congregation members started, and they came and settled there. That happened to be Franciscans. And the Franciscans were just started, and Francis Assisi was alive then. And Franciscans established one monastery there in the same place where these Augustinians had the congregation, this Anthony, the Fernando, was living. And this Franciscan monastery was named after Saint Anthony of Egypt. There is a very famous hermit who lived in the deserts of Egypt. He's called Saint Anthony the Great, the Saint Anthony of Egypt. He is very well known hermit, and he is the first hermit in the history, and he is also called as the father of all the monastic life. All the monasteries and all the monastic life started in imitation of Saint Anthony of Egypt. So he was very famous until those days. And so that is from him, from his inspiration, so many hermits are there in different parts of the world. Even today, there are hermits living in different parts of the world. In our new retreat center, Pantasa, Wales, we have almost around 14-15 acres of land. There is a forest inside that land, and in that forest, elderly nun, a monk, or a hermitess is living there in the forest in a small hut, and she is living inside, and she is living there for many years, and she is sitting there and praying for the whole world. Even in this modern world, there are people like this, and she comes down once in a while, and especially for the daily mass, she comes to our retreat center there every day morning, and then she goes back to the forest, and she stays in the small hut-like place with a simple life. I visited one day 2-3 times, and whenever I visited, I was so touched by the simple life. A small cot, no bed, and simple clothes, and even the food and item, very simple things, even plates, only one plate, and the mobile phone, which he has one old Nokia mobile phone. And I asked this hermitess, why don't you use other things? And she said, I want to be simple as much as possible. And she has no radio, no TV, nothing of that sort. And so everything so simple life. And there are so many hermites who are living in the different parts of the world like this. So Saint Anthony of Great, Egypt, he was also a hermit like this. And he was in the desert and he was living there. So these Franciscans who came and established a monastery in the town where Anthony of Padua, who was a priest, as his name was Fernando then, he was living in that same village, same town. And one day they came to know 5 Franciscan missionaries were killed, martyred in Morocco as they were preaching the gospel to the Muslims there. They were killed, they were persecuted and they were killed. And then their bodies were taken back to the Lisbon, to Portugal. And even the queen and the kings and everyone were accompanying the body of these 5 Franciscan friars from Portugal. And Saint Anthony, whose name then was Fernando, Father Fernando, he happened to see this funeral and he joined with this funeral and he was inspired by these martyrs. And then he went and spoke to his spiritual fathers and superiors and said, I want to become a Franciscan friar. I want to become a Franciscan. And then after lots of arguments, lots of discussions and pleading, begging, at the end his superiors gave permission for him to join the Franciscan order. And then he went and joined the Franciscan order and he took the name of Anthony of Egypt. And he took adopted the name of Saint Anthony of Egypt. And from then he was called Saint Anthony. Father Anthony. And then later he became Saint Anthony of Padua. And then when he became a priest in the Franciscan order, he wanted to go to Morocco, where these 5 Franciscans were killed. And he wanted to preach in Morocco and start preaching gospel and be a martyr in Morocco. He knew there is a possibility of martyrdom. And he wanted to be a martyr for Christ, so he was sent to Morocco. But when he went to Morocco, in Morocco he fell ill. He could not do much because the plan of God was different. The plan of God was not for him to be martyred in Morocco, but God had another higher plan. And therefore he was ill, terribly ill, and then they sent him back to Portugal. So he could not become a martyr, but he became ill and sick completely. And as they were coming back in the ship in which they traveled got into a strong storm, and then the ship ended up landing in Sicily, Italy. And then he came out of the ship and then went to one of the Franciscan convents there in Sicily. And then he went and spoke to them and they treated him very well. Because of the good hospitality of the Franciscans, he gathered his strength back and he was healed. And then he, along with another priest, he went and stayed in a cave. And there he spent time in prayers and fasting and penances and reflection and reading the Bible. And he went so many days and months there in prayer. And one day there was a gathering of the Franciscans and I think it's Dominicans. So a gathering of the Franciscans and Dominicans. And then in that gathering, the Dominicans thought, since Franciscans are hosting this program, they will be preaching the sermon. But the Franciscans thought the Dominicans are famous for preachers. They are order of preachers. The Dominicans will preach. And when they came, gathering started, nobody is there willing to preach because everyone was in confusion. Then the head of the monastery, the Franciscan monastery, he took a step and said, call Anthony and let him preach. And because this monastery, the head of the monastery knew this Anthony, Saint Anthony was a very powerful reflections. He has the knowledge and wisdom. So he called Saint Anthony and said, "You preach today." Then Saint Anthony hesitated. He was hesitant and he said, "No, I'm not worthy to preach here. I don't want to preach." But the head of the monastery, he said, "You have to preach." Under obedience, he preached the gospel. And that preaching made an impact on all of them. Dominicans, Franciscans, everybody who gathered, everyone was so impressed by this preaching because there was fire in it. And they were all amazed by seeing his wisdom and knowledge of the Word of God. And then slowly his fame reached everywhere. Even Saint Francis of Assisi came to know about his preaching skill and his knowledge. And Francis of Assisi appointed him in charge of the whole Italy. The Franciscan order of the provincial made him provincial of the Italy, especially the northern Italy. And then he started preaching the gospel everywhere. And he became so famous, there were people standing, even booking the seats in the church even previous day and sleeping in the church so that they don't miss the opportunity to listen to his preaching. And the big churches were packed when he comes to preach. And then he had to preach in the big market squares. And even the market squares were filled with the people. And at the same time, there were sometimes 30,000, 40,000 people were gathered to listen to Saint Anthony of Padua. It is believed that he had made almost more than 400 travels in and out of Italy to preach the gospel. 400 times and traveling journeys in his young age. And he preached the gospel, and there was miracles was attributed to him. So many miracles were attributed to him. And he was also a preacher, a defender of the faith against the heretics. Like today, there were so many groups and denominations were there, and he used to preach thoroughly against these heretics. And therefore, he was known as the hammer of the heretics. His preachings were like the hammers on their head. So powerful it was. And he was called the hammer of heretics. And then he preached the gospel. One day when he went to a village to preach the gospel, the people did not listen to him. They rejected him because they were heretics. And then Saint Anthony, he got disappointed and he came to a seashore. And he preached the gospel to the sea, looking at the sea. And all the fish came to listen to him. And the fish was jumping and dancing and listening to him. And some of the villagers saw this and they went and told everybody. And everyone came to see this miracle. And then Saint Anthony told them, even the people of God are not receptive, but these fish and creatures of God are receptive. So I prefer to preach to these creatures than you. And then they repented. They repented and asked Saint Anthony to preach to them. So there are so many miracles are attributed to him. One of those miracles, because we all believe Saint Anthony is the special intercessor for the lost things. And through the powerful intercession of Saint Anthony, so many people get the lost things back. I have seen many people giving testimonies of this. Why this speciality? Why people call him as the patron saint for the lost things? Because Saint Francis of Assisi, looking at the glory and the goodness and graces of Saint Anthony, Saint Francis of Assisi appointed him as in charge to teach the Franciscans. He was in charge of teaching and preaching to the Franciscans. And also he was also preaching to the Pope. And sometimes even he represented Pope in different places to preach. Because Saint Francis of Assisi and Pope were very connected because of his fame and name. And even Pope was aware of his fame and name. And that is how he even represented Pope in many places to preach. And then Francis of Assisi appointed him as the preacher and also in charge of the seminarians. And he was giving formation for the clergy of the Franciscans. because Francis Assisi knew St. Anthony is the best person to give the education and formation for the Franciscan friars. And one day, one of the seminarians who wanted to leave the seminary, he stole one prayer book, Psalm book of St. Anthony. He stole it and went. Those days, there was no printing machine. So each book is very expensive book. And it's not easy to replace it. It's very expensive to buy. An ordinary monk, he cannot afford to buy a new book. And so it is a handwritten, hand-copied book, prayer book, which was stolen by one of the seminarians, and he left. And then St. Anthony, when he came to know that he lost his very valuable book, which he was using every day for prayer, he felt so bad because there was no other copies of Psalms available. So he knelt down in the presence of God and prayed and said, Lord, give me back that prayer book at least. And because of his powerful prayer, he not only got the prayer book back, but also the seminarian came back and became a priest. So he got him converted, and not only he got the prayer book, but he also got the thief became also a good person, converted. And that is why anyone who lose anything, they all start asking the intercession of St. Anthony, because his intercession became very powerful and very strong. You can see when you see the pictures of St. Anthony, and St. Anthony is holding one lily, a flower, lily flower, and also a book. On the book there is a baby, infant Jesus, child Jesus. So what is the story behind it? Because one day when he was staying in one house which was provided by a lord, a very rich man, and it was a small room, and where he was praying in the closed room. And one day when this lord, the owner, the master of the house was walking, he could see a powerful light coming from one side. Then he wanted to see the supernatural light that is coming out of one part of his building. He went and searched, and then he came to know this light was coming through the small holes of St. Anthony's room. Then he went and he started peeping through the small holes, and he wanted to see what exactly happening inside. And then he saw St. Anthony is sitting there, kneeling down with so much of respect and reverence, and in his hand there is a baby Jesus. There is baby Jesus, and touching his face and embracing him, kissing him, talking to him. And St. Anthony was speaking to this child Jesus, and in front of him there was Bible book kept open, and child Jesus is standing there and embracing St. Anthony, and all these intimacy was going on between child Jesus and St. Anthony. And then this master, the owner of this house, he was so shocked with fear and trembling. He knelt down in front of the door. And when St. Anthony came and opened, this man is kneeling down, crying there. And then Anthony told him not to tell these things to anyone until his death. And these things came out after his death. So you can see so many like these legends, and there are legends about St. Anthony. There was one day, there was an atheist who did not believe in God, who wanted to mock St. Anthony and said there is no God's presence in the Blessed Sacrament. One day when St. Anthony was carrying the Blessed Sacrament, this atheist, he was feeding his donkey, which was hungry for 3 days. He was not given any food. And then when he was about to give the food, suddenly St. Anthony was passing by with the Blessed Sacrament. The donkey saw the fodder, and also the donkey saw St. Anthony carrying the Blessed Sacrament. And then suddenly in front of this atheist, this donkey did not even look at the fodder, but knelt down in front of the Blessed Sacrament. And this is also one of the legends which are circulated among the people. And thus that atheist got converted, and we came to know there is strong presence, real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. So, my brothers and sisters, as we celebrate the feast of St. Anthony, Let's ask the intercession of Saint Anthony in a special way. When he died in 1231, he died within 1 year. His fame spread everywhere. Within 1 year, Pope canonized him, made him a saint. After almost 340 years, his body was reopened. His tomb was opened to shift the body to the newly built basilica in Padua. When they opened the body, all the body parts were turned into dust, except the tongue. The tongue was as if it was a living person's tongue, so fresh. And that became very famous, and everywhere there are so many people started coming, and this tongue is still exposed and still kept in Padua. Because he was a powerful preacher, he preached the gospel without any fear and mincing the words. And when during the preachings, when the people became, everyone knew his power, anointing, his powerful speech and preaching. Therefore, wherever he went, thousands of people used to flock and crowded. And later, in the last years of his life, even there were bodyguards to protect him from people, because people started collecting his clothes, and they started removing his clothes, because they all knew he's a living saint and he's going to be saint soon. So people started collecting his clothes and his the sandals and all the other things which he was using. And therefore, there were bodyguards surrounding him so that people may not take his clothes and other things. So because he was so famous. So my dear brothers and sisters, as we celebrate the feast of Saint Anthony today, let's ask the intercession of Saint Anthony in a special way and have a special devotion to Saint Anthony. And he lived a holy life. He preached the gospel without compromising, and he preached the truth even to the heretics so strongly and without even having any compromise on it. So let us be inspired through the powerful intercession of Saint Anthony of Padua.